committee. This meeting will be webcast and a record retained on the council website for up to 2 years. By participating in this meeting, you're consenting for your name, the content of what you say, and your image to be broadcast and stored to the council website. If any member, officer or member of the public addressing the committee has concerns with this, please contact the committee services officer immediately. For those at home viewing the webcast, I'd like to inform you that if you look above the video, you will see a resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear in the right-hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and debate. Next item on the agenda is apologies. So I have Councillor Jeff Green has sent his apologies, Councillor Andrew Hodson is deputising, and Councillor Tony Jones has sent his apologies, and Councillor Brian Kenny is deputising him. Thank you. Okay, Members' Code of Conduct. So I'm going to ask members now to consider whether or not they have any disclosable pecuniary interests and or any other relevant interest in connection with any items on this agenda, and if so, to declare them now and state the nature of the interest. No? Okay, thank you. Next we come to minutes. So I'm going to ask members to approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of July 2021. I'm going to move that we agree them. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Nolan. Seconded. Okay, public and member questions. I haven't received any public questions. I haven't received any statements or petitions, and no questions by members. Thank you. So, Section A, Budget and Performance Management now. Agenda item 6 is the Budget Monitoring 2021-22 Quarter 1 report. Chair Hale, would you all going to present that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. So, as the Chair mentioned, this report is the financial year-end forecast for as at the end of June for the Council's revenue position for the year. The current forecast indicates a potential overspend so far of just under £1 million, 963,000, and is mainly as a result of the unachievement of car parking income of around 700,000, although there are variances in other areas. As the committee will be aware, we are not able to present an unbalanced budget at the end of the year, and therefore we need to ensure the financial position at the end of the year is balanced. Myself and the strategic leadership team are currently working on options at the moment to ensure the budget can be brought back into balance by the end of the year, and this will be brought to you at the end of September, which will be the next monitoring period at Q2. Within the report, there is a summary table of the forecast by each directorate, and this is shown on page 14 in Table 1. And I'll just take you through some of the variances by the directorates in the report this evening. Within the Adult Care and Health Committee, a small services surplus is being forecast, and this is mainly a result of vacancy savings from posts that have yet to be recruited to, and also some providers who are yet to sign up to paying the real living wage to their staff. Although work is still ongoing to encourage these providers to sign up to ensure that this does happen. Within the Chief Executive's Office, there's a small adverse variance being reported to the underachievement of marketing income as a result of the comms and marketing team being taken up on other activities as a result of COVID-19. Children, families and education are currently forecasting a break-even position. However, within the Directorate, there are some favourable variances being reported due to underspends on staffing budgets and where they have been successful in achieving grant funding, and this is being offset by some of the adverse variances within the schools team as a result of the ongoing costs within the PFI charges as a relation to the Kingsway school building. A request was actually submitted to the Department for Education for funding to support the PFI costs for this year, but since the report's been published, we have received notification that this has been declined, and the Directorate has a project team in place at the moment to look at other options for the site which may mitigate these costs in the future. Within the Law and Governance Directorate, a small favourable position is being forecast, mainly a result of funding that we had received from the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Combined Authority as a result of contributions towards the joint elections that were held earlier on this year. The Neighbourhood Services Directorate is currently forecasting an adverse variance of just over £1 million, which, as I mentioned previously, the majority of this is a result of the unachievement of car parking income. Although there are other areas within the Directorate that are also contributing to this small adverse variance. Within community safety and transport, an income shortfall is expected to be is expected due to contracts that are no longer in operation to provide services to third parties, and there is a review ongoing of the community patrol service that may mitigate this variance by the time we come back to report for the next quarter. In the Highways and Infrastructure Service, some of the recharge of the design team staff to capital projects has not been possible, as we've actually had a review of the capital programme and there has been some pausing of capital projects during the year. However, as more funding becomes available for regeneration schemes, some of these schemes will require some specialist design resource, and this should mitigate some, if not all, of that pressure, as the team will be able to charge their staff time towards these capital projects funded from that external funding. Just picking up on the underachievement of car parking income, as reported at the Decision Review Committee in August, myself and the Director of Neighbourhoods Services will work together now to bring forward some options to the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee as to how this can be mitigated to ensure that we can produce a balanced budget for the end of the year. Within Neighbourhoods Directorate, the Leisure, Libraries and Park Service are currently forecasting a balanced outturn at the end of the year, as at the end of June. When the budget was agreed in March, there was some additional temporary growth provided for these areas to recognise that the income wouldn't be fully achievable for this year, as the services are still recovering from the impact of COVID-19, and that also it might take a while for customers to actually return back into those services, and not at the levels as before COVID-19 struck. The government has also provided an extension to the sales fees and charges compensation scheme for 3 months up to the end of June, and this has provided some additional income to offset these costs. At this current time, the balanced forecast outturn position is being reported until a more informed position can be provided at the end of Q2. Some of the services didn't reopen at the start of April and have had a phased reopening. So until we get to the end of September, really, that will provide a much better position of how we're getting on in terms of the estimate we put in for the additional growth for the funding that they will be lost for the first 6 months of the year. And we will come and report that back to you at the end of Q2. Within Regen and Place, there's a small surplus variance being forecast to the end of the year, which is mainly a result of additional grant funding received for the housing service. But there are some, reported in the report, some minor pressures within planning and regeneration that is being offset against that. Within the Resources Directorate, there is an adverse variance currently being forecast. And this is mainly as a result of two things. So it's a decrease in the uptake of the school's IT service, which they buy back from us. And this has resulted in a reduction in income for the digital and IT service. And there's also a similar reduction in income from court fees within revenues and benefits, which is due to the delay in restarting court proceedings following the court reopening after COVID-19 for non-payment of council tax. Both of these areas are being reviewed at the moment. The ICT and digital service are looking to see whether there are any costs that are relating to the school's buyback service that could be reduced accordingly, and also whether the recovery of court fees can be re-established now that the court proceedings are taking place back to pre-COVID levels. There is also a temporary pressure looming within the Resources Directorate at the moment, which relates to the offer of the pay award from the National Employers Association, which has currently been offered at 1.75% to all staff. For this year, there was a small growth item included within the budget for a nominal pay increase of £250 to all council staff who earned £24,000 and below. And this was specified by the Chancellor in his autumn statement last year, where he stated that all public sector staff, with the exception of those earning £24,000 and under, would have their pay increases paused for this year. As a result of that statement, which came out, as I say, in the autumn, the majority of the growth item had been taken out of the budget for next year for pay increases. And now that the Employers Association has made that offer to the employers for a 1.75 pay award, if that has been agreed, or if it will be agreed this year, this will present a pressure of just over £2 million for the council. There are still talks ongoing with the National Employers Association and the trade unions, and these are have not concluded yet and will be concluded later on in the year. Provision has been made for this to be paid out of the Financial Resilience Reserve because there are ongoing pressures included within the budget and the NTFP for future years' pay increases. So it will just be a one-off pressure for this year. As I say, it can be mitigated from the Financial Resilience Reserve. The report also highlights additional funding of just under £26 million received from the government since the 1st of April for the longer impact of COVID-19 for this year, and the majority of that has been fully passported to businesses. As the committee will be aware, the budget includes an assumption that the council will be awarded exceptional financial support or a capitalisation directive of £10.7 million from HM Treasury for this year. This is conditional on the outcome that an external assurance review is commissioned by MHCLG. This review is now concluded and the report is awaited. MHCLG have maintained that the council should still do everything possible, however, to try and reduce the reliance on that capitalisation directive throughout the remainder of the year. As a result of the additional funding that we have received, as I mentioned just before, from COVID-19 that we weren't expecting, it may be possible to utilise some of this funding to reduce the value of the capitalisation directive for this year. But at this moment, it's difficult to determine because the longer-term impact of COVID-19 is unknown. And we're currently undertaking an assessment of this, and more of this will have an informed view at Q2, and the outcome will be reported to the committee then as to whether some of that funding could be used to potentially reduce the capitalisation value. And finally, Chair, in anticipation of the implementation of the new financial system that goes live in April next year, there has been a review and a clean-up of the general ledger and the current financial system and the budget codes has been undertaken, and some environment requests have been made as part of the recommendations to ensure that the budgets are being held in and monitored in the correct place when we transfer all the information over into the new financial system from the 1st of April. So the recommendations, Chair, to note the position at the end of Q1, which is at the end of June, to note the additional COVID grant funding received, and also to approve the budget amendments made in anticipation of the implementation of the new financial system. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chair. Do I have any questions or comments from members? Councillor Gray?
Yeah, it's probably a political decision, but I just wanted to check on page 33, it's about the leisure centre, so I don't know who best to ask, to be honest. It's just, I wanted to check amongst officers that the working assumption is that the leisure centres will all be open next year, including Woodchurch Leisure Centre. Is that currently still the working assumption?
The Woodchurch Leisure Centre was only agreed to be closed temporarily for 1 year as part of the budget for this year. So as at this moment, there's no plans to keep it closed unless members decide that that's something that they want to take forward as part of the budget for next year.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Anderson?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for that report. I've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind, Chair, to go through. So my first question is on page 17, Wirral Evolutions. And it states that the restructure has been paused pending a report to the Adult Social Care and Public Health Committee. I did think the shareholder board was the ultimate body responsible, but no, that doesn't matter. You state that the savings, the £500,000, will be achieved by other means. Can you tell me what those means are? And did you have discussions with the Director about how those savings will be made? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we actually had a shareholder board meeting this morning where there was some papers been deferred to the Adult Care and Health Committee as a result of the finances for Wirral Evolution. So the savings that, the mitigating savings as at this moment for Wirral Evolutions are planned to be achieved from the social care grant, which is being held in reserve at the moment to mitigate any additional pressures from social care during the year. Could be things like winter pressures or additional COVID funding. I have had a discussion with the Director of Adult Care and Health and we have agreed that at this moment in time that is a potential area where these will be funded from. It does pend the decision of the Adult Care and Health Committee as to whether they agree, the requests from Wirral Evolutions that were deferred from the shareholder board this morning.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to ask all my questions in one go. Don't get me first, so do you mind if I come back in? Is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks for that one. So just going on to then neighbourhoods on page 32. Well, it goes on about the everything's green, but the shortfalls, and you do say there's additional EVRs. I'm just wondering if this is all achievable, the EVRs, and the money put in for the budget. Are we going to capitalise those EVRs, or is that coming out of reserves?
Okay, thank you for you, Chair. Thank you. So yes, I've worked myself with the Director of Neighbourhoods and the Assistant Director for HR in looking at doing an assessment of all the EVRs across the Directorate. There is a robust plan. We have identified specific posts where EVRs have been agreed already, so the savings are achievable for these EVRs. Last year, so the actual payment for exit payments for people exiting the council on EVR are coming from reserves. Last year there was a reserve held specifically for this purpose. Not all of the people have exited. Most of the EVRs and the people exiting happened on the 31st of March last year. Not all of the exits have happened as at the 31st of March due to some phasing to make sure that there's capacity within the Directorate. And there is still £1 million held in reserve for any exit payments that will happen this year. Thanks
for that. So just on that £1 million that's held in reserves, was any of that £1 million for Wirral Evolutions to restructure and to go through the EVR process? Is that what that £1 million was identified for, or was it for other departments in the council?
Yeah, so the £1 million has been carried forward. So some of the funding was agreed last year. Some of it's been held as an accrual for people leaving who were signed to leave the organisation last year, but actually haven't left this year. So the total value, which I don't have with me at the moment, but I can provide for you, over the 2 years was around about 4 million. And some of that did include Wirral Evolutions.
Just final question. Thanks for your patience. So on the car parking income, we've got, well, in the whole report, if we go to regeneration, there's lots. It says lots there about the mitigations have been found. Mitigations have been found for the savings that not have been achieved. If we can just highlight what those mitigations are, and again the discussions you've had with the department. I take it these aren't coming from the committee. So my question is then on the car parking charges. I mean, in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And if we've got to go through the TRO process, which could take up to a process of 9 months. So we probably weren't going to actually achieve that £1 million anyway. The report does say on that car parking charges that it was called in twice. Can we just correct the record for that? Actually, it's for the minutes. It wasn't called in twice at all. So what discussions did you have about with either the committee or the director about mitigating those charges in year? Thanks, Chair.
Just for clarification, Councillor Anderson, so is that the mitigations for the car parking charges?
Yeah, I'm just trying to highlight this. Throughout the report, there's mitigations been found for quite a lot of things, which is good. We need to find mitigations to balance a budget. But you mentioned verbally in your report earlier 3 times about car parking charges that it hasn't been found, but we seem to have found a lot of mitigations for. Well, there's tens of items in here. Wirral Evolutions, a lot in regen. So I'm just wondering what the mitigations could be or will be for those car parking charges as well. Thank you.
So for some of the car parking charges that we know we weren't going to achieve for the start of the year, we already knew that there were some savings that could be achieved through vacancies and posts that have not been recruited to at the start of the year. There is a recruitment panel which meets every fortnight, to actually assess whether posts should be recruited to or not. And that panel is ensuring that that some of the posts that can be delayed as much as possible to ensure that we can find additional savings and hold that money temporarily to offset some of the savings for the car parking. As the Decision Review Committee was only last month, myself and the Director of Neighbourhoods only just started to kind of have those discussions about how the rest of that 700,000 can be mitigated. As mentioned before, you did talk about a restructure and potential EVRs. There may be other posts that may be coming forward for EVRs that we've just started to talk about. But as I say, because it was only last month that we've only sort of started to have those discussions. So we will have those over the next month or so and then bring those back to the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee. If it's not the next one, it'll be the one after for some options for the committee to discuss and consider whether they want to take those forward.
Thank you. Just before I go to Councillor Gilchrist, Vicky, I wonder if you mind just clarifying the language in the report about the call-ins, and also it would be helpful as Councillor Anderson referred to evolutions and the different roles of the adult committee and shareholder board with regards to Wirral evolutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the decision in relation to car parking was called in by two groups. So there were in effect two call-ins, but they both happened simultaneously at the same time. So I think hopefully that explains maybe it could have been phrased slightly differently, but it wasn't called in on two separate occasions. And in relation to Wirral Evolutions, obviously the Adult Committee takes responsibility for the contract that is in place between the Council and Wirral Evolutions and any matters relating to that contract. The Shareholder Board obviously deals with governance issues in relation to the company and deals with any issues that the Council needs to give agreement to, for example, under the shareholder agreement that is in place.
Thank you for that. Helpful. Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll start by asking about car parking. I had noted the point about being called in twice as the author of one of the reasons for a call-in. As Ms Vicky Shaw has correctly identified, there were two separate call-ins heard at the same time. Perhaps future reports could get that description more accurate. I think reading the section on page 28 about highways infrastructure and parking charges, my view would be that the Decision Review Committee recognised the need for a thorough process that would take account of representations. The tenor of some of the comments about the car parking charges, perhaps some officers felt might have been tackled a different way. I certainly felt that we set by all parties a sum when we were drawing up the budget, but that sum hasn't proved to be achievable in practice and didn't appear to be achievable from an early stage. So whilst there's a sort of element of unhappiness or unease about the way matters have turned out in terms of the overall budget, it'd be unfair to pin too many complaints on the fact that the car parking was called in. As we were often told at the start of the year, lots of things happen during the course of the year. Things come and go. You can pass a budget one day and things start changing the next day. That was the general theme that officers explained to us at the time. I have a comment, and I'd like to move this and see what members' views are as an additional recommendation, and I'll read it suitably slowly. Future reports should show any resultant movements in reserves and balances, provide information on any mitigations identified, and explicitly refer to the decision taken with regard to the golf resort. Now, I say that because I know we're dealing with quarter one up to a certain point, but the big thing that has moved and occurred at the special council meeting was clearly a decision to fund the the solving, I'll put it that way, the solving or resolution of the claims brought forward on behalf of that organisation. And therefore, that specific decision ought to be reflected in future budget monitoring reports, and we should have what I call a running total of our reserves and balances. So I move that, Chair. I don't know if there'll be a seconder.
Chair, if I may, can I just ask Councillor Gilchrist to repeat
Yes.
that, please? Thank you.
Certainly. Future reports should show any resultant movements in reserves and balances, provide information on any mitigations identified, and explicitly refer to the decision taken with regard to the golf resort.
Councillor Robinson.
Hi, should I just have clarity, please? Because I believe it's in the report that it's going to be on the audit and risk management. It's going to be on the risk register. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gray.
Can I just clarify why we would want to regularly revisit something that was a one-off when
Well,
car
there's a
parking
question.
charges are an ongoing thing? So that just seems a bit of an odd thing to do, to keep revisiting a one-off decision.
I suspect that's one for, not for officers, as they're not the ones that are suggesting that we keep referring to it at every available opportunity. So I don't think that's directed at officers. That we can have a debate about this. Do we have a seconder first? We don't.
I just, you might, well, I won't say it. I don't understand the last sentence of Councillor Gilchrist's resolution. I understand that we had an unexpected, Councillor Gray's quite right, it was a one-off, but it's a one-off for car parking charges as well, so I don't think there's need to make that point. But I know we had an unexpected one-off. Is the purpose of that motion to mitigate that one-off for in year and to replenish those reserves? Is that the reason of Councillor Gilchrist's motion?
Through you, Chair, it's a matter not of replenishing reserves, but having a clearer perspective on what movements actually take place, and the scale of the sum of money being made available to settle the golf resort matter, I would have thought should be or is a major financial matter for this committee to keep in mind.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. I think if it helps, just to give assurances to Councillor Gilchrist, the reserves are reported in the reports now anyway, so they, for the first time they are included within the Q1 report, and they will come to every reporting period, so every committee from now on, so that will already be included. For the payment as a result of relating to the golf resort, as that's a payment that has incurred within the Q2 timescale, that will be reported anyway as part of the Q2 reports, and where that will actually be funded from. So that will already come as part of the Q2. It will only come once, as you say, because it's a one-off. So I don't know whether that provides assurances to Councillor Gilchrist that that will already come. I suppose the other thing that we don't report is the general fund balances, which is a one-off figure that we have every year. We only report that once a year, at the end of the year and in the statement of accounts, but that's one figure that doesn't generally change, and there's no reason why we can't report that with the reserves figure on a quarterly basis as well.
Councillor Gilchrist.
I thank Chair for those assurances and look forward to those specific items being included. Thank you, Chair.
So, Councillor Rennie.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry to bore the meeting of some members, but my question again was on car parking charges. On the reconvened second half of the Decision Review Committee, it came to light, in fact I spoke about it and so did others, but when we were questioning officers, we were talking about the displacement of car parking charges once they were implemented, particularly to residential roads. And I asked the officers what the plan was from that, and clearly they were thinking in the range of offering residents parking schemes. That was the first time that had actually, I think to my knowledge, been surfaced verbally at a meeting, but clearly if that is to be the case, then there is going to be a cost to that. So the question is really not for now, but for later on. Where will that cost appear? Because clearly you're talking about that you would hope to make the full expected savings will be achieved in 2022-23. But surely with the cost of residents' parking schemes, if that was the way the authority was going to go, there will be, that would obviously diminish some of the savings, I would imagine. So where will we be able to track that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. So all of the information that followed out from the Decision Review Committee, so the mitigation of the savings, any additional costs, will come back to the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee. So there will be a full report on all of the things that were agreed at Decision Review and all the things that officers have agreed to do. So that will come back to the committee and will be reported to the committee. I don't think it will be in time for the next committee, but it'll be definitely the one after that.
So it goes to the relevant committee. Councillor Cleary?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions for Sheriff. I'll give them both together if that's okay. First of all, page 30 refers to the garden waste scheme and that it's, you know, a balanced budget position, but that obviously was before the recent announcement that it was moving to 4 weekly rather than 2 weekly. So, you know, my concern there is that we've had a lot of disruption to garden waste over the last 18 months or so for, you know, understandable reasons, but I think there's a danger that the public is starting to lose a bit of confidence in the scheme. But given that the current delays are down to a shortage of BIFA drivers, do we have any scope within our contract to then claim monies back? Because it's not our fault that, you know, BIFA doesn't have enough drivers. So that's my first question. Can we actually reclaim some money out of that contract? Secondly, on page 35, there's a reference to MIAS and the difficulties in terms of the budget with regard to the service that they provide. So I'd just like some clarification on that and maybe some reassurance that if we're going to, as it says in the report, address the budget gap on that service, will we still have the necessary capacity to deal with, you know, matters regarding ecology, waste, heritage when it comes to things like planning applications? Or is there any kind of suggestion that the level of service we'll be able to provide in terms of dealing with those kind of applications would in any way be undermined? So there were my two questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Just in terms of the first comment, I'll pick that up with the Director of Neighbourhoods and discuss that in terms of the contract for BIFA. As far as I'm aware, BIFA are actually experiencing additional costs themselves because they're having to get additional drivers in, and that is costing them more. As you say, it is a temporary solution at the moment that we've moved to the 4 weeks, just because of the capacity within the BIFA contract and also additional drivers going off with COVID-19. So I'm not aware that we are able to have any compensation from BIFA as a result of that, but I will pick that up with the Director of Neighbourhoods and come back to the committee on that. Just in terms of your question regards to the planning service, there is no anticipated loss of additional work or lack of capacity as a result of this. We do recognise it's a very important service. You know, we have had previous issues with our local plan that have been addressed now, and that service is about to recruit 2 additional staff. Some posts have been agreed at the vacancy panel. So I don't anticipate that there would be any reduction or lack of capacity within that service, unless there is an issue specifically with being able to recruit any staff, whether it's permanent staff or agency staff within that service. But we are doing everything we can to try and get that additional capacity in to make sure that nothing suffers as a result of that.
If I could just seek some further clarifications, that means that there will be additional employees within the council who will cover a service that was previously provided by MIAS. Is that what we're saying?
I'm not entirely sure that we are covering the actual MIAS service ourselves. We have got additional capacity within the planning team to be able to cover additional work within planning. If there is additional capacity that's required within MIAS, there may be an opportunity for us to support that if we have got the capacity. But otherwise, the MIAS service would have to get the additional capacity within themselves, and then we would continue to support them with the additional funding for that service.
Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
So, Councillor Cleary, the MIAS service is currently operated by Sefton Council, so there's been a issue around just some of the pricing structure of that, so we're working actively to look at that arrangement with Sefton Council so we can get better value as we're doing with bigger applications, and we are looking at other ways as well of raising investment into the planning service without that costing or being a pressure on the council's revenue budget.
Okay, thanks for that. Could I just ask that we get further detail on this going forward as the situation becomes clearer in future reports? Yeah, thanks very much.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Cleary's rightly raised the issue about the changes, temporary suspension of the brown bin service, perhaps we could get a bit of detail on the swings and roundabouts of this, because I suspect there will be residents who decide not to have a compost heap or add to their compost heap, but put it in some of the material in their green bin for the next fortnight or so, which will add to the weight of material that has to be carried by Biffa, but also because I think we pay the Merseyside Authority a figure based on our tonnage that actually has to be processed, then there are going to be various costs incurred to us via other routes. So it would be helpful if financial reports show the complete picture as it emerges on that.
I won't bring you in, Chair, so I imagine you won't know the finer details of that particular item, but we'll note what Councillor Gilchrist has said. If no one else wants to speak, I'm going to move that we agree the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Nolan. Can we agree by assent? Yes, thank you. Chair, it's you again. We are on to the next agenda item, which is Capital Monitoring Report, Q1.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. As you say, the report is the forecast year-end position for the Council's capital programme for the year as at the end of June. At full council in March, capital programme was agreed of £83.8 million, and this included £30 million of external funding within that sum. Since the programme was agreed, some schemes yet to be completed have been carried forward into the programme from last year, and we have also received an additional external funding of £13 million into the programme for this year, and this is highlighted individually in section 3.4 of the report. As part of the Q1 monitoring, every scheme within the capital programme has been reviewed to ensure that it's been profiled correctly and it can actually be delivered in year. And where schemes can be reprofiled into future years this would save revenue costs of borrowing. This has been agreed with the project managers and this has been completed and is in the report for reprofiling for today. All of the reprofiled schemes are identified in section 3.3 of the report. And as a result now, to ensure that only the schemes that can be delivered in year are included within the programme, there has been this reprofiling identified in section 3.3 of schemes that are into future years. So as at the end of June, all the schemes that you see in the capital programme now are on track to be delivered by the end of the financial year. The capital programme has now moved from the agreed position, agreed at full council, of just under 84 million in March, to a forecast of 80 million to the end of this year. And some of this is as a result of, as I said, some of the reprofiling into next year, some of the additional funding being received in year, and some of the schemes that have not yet been completed from last year being moved into the programme for this year. The capital programme is fully funded, and this is funded from a mix of borrowing, external funding, and also some minor revenue contributions. In the report, section 3.2 highlights some of the progress being made and some of the updates specifically to some of the larger schemes that are in the capital programme. Since the programme was agreed, excuse me, there has been request for some additional schemes to be included within the programme, and these are included within section 3.5 of the report. Finally, Chair, Appendix 3 of the report just wanted to highlight to the committee is a table of environments where unused budgets from the capital schemes are either being consolidated into one main scheme or being transferred into the capital programme to support other schemes. And these, the committee has delegated authority and onward recommendation to full council to approve these environments. So the recommendations in total, Chair, for the committee to recommend onward to full council the approval of the external additional funding that's been received up to Q1, and also the revising and the reprofiling of the capital programme to the end of the year. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Do any members have any questions or comments? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask, based on page 55, 3.2.2, the extra care housing, the Housing 21 scheme, I actually state in Upton, I know this obviously, it says subject to planning permission, whilst we all sort of think, you know, care schemes obviously are a fantastic thing to provide. I think what this has created is a sort of, the public obviously quite rightly think that this is obviously, the council are obviously putting, I think in total £3 million into the Housing 21. I have sent an email, you're on annual leave, and I did get some responses obviously from your colleague, which was good of him to reply, is I just also wanted to make the point that it's actually naming the scheme rather than actually the actual the capital, which obviously, you know, the public think then the things obviously are already a done deal as such. So on this scheme here, obviously, and no further down the report, it mentions it's 2.764, but I think in this section for adults, I might be wrong, it just gives the 2.5, but actually the whole full scheme is 3 million. So is that going to be not in 2024, 25? I don't know how many years. It just didn't seem to tally up in the other. And it was just to sort of say, how do we sort of get this money back as such, obviously from this investment as such, was at the £3 million. How does that come back into the council? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. So yeah, just to provide some clarity of this scheme really. So Housing 21 is a registered provider, and they have a £15 million development scheme to build 80 extra care housing units for residents who are 65 plus and over. The scheme is under the ownership of Housing 21, so it is their scheme. It's not a council scheme, but the council, as agreed at the Adult Care and Health Committee in January, have agreed to provide a grant contribution to support this scheme. So Housing 21, as I say, it's a development scheme of 15 million. The council are contributing around about 3.5 million towards the scheme, and the balance is actually coming from Homes England to support the scheme as well. The scheme is being run over 2 years. So, Councillor Robinson, the reason for the different amounts within the report, the profile of the grant that we're actually paying to them will be 2.8 million in this year, pending planning permission being agreed, and then the balance will be paid next year in 22-23 as well. So the planning permission is being applied for by the registered provider, which is Housing 21. As I say, they are the owner of the scheme and the custodian of the scheme, and the council is just providing some grant to enable the full scheme to go ahead. Just in terms of how we get the money back, you know, as part of our sort of Wirral plan, we do need to ensure that we have adequate housing available for people over 65, and extra care housing is a really good way of providing that type of housing for them. Once the units are up, that will be subject to council tax. And also in our Wirral plan, one of our themes is to help the elderly and older people and the most vulnerable. And by actually including them within extra care housing, this has enabled them to live in their houses longer, more independently. And what that means is that they potentially don't go into residential care at an earlier time. And that actually it's less of a cost to council in terms of what we would spend in care provision in residential care and potentially domiciliary care later on in life.
So, could I just go back? Sorry. I suppose obviously the thing was that we didn't, the first I heard about it obviously being that this amount of money going in was obviously in this report. But obviously, so when you said that, I agree with everything you said about obviously keeping people out in their own homes, obviously you'll put them into care schemes, etc. But so the total of £3 million, at this point, what is that going to pay for? Because the Housing 21 do not own that site pre-planning application anyway, so I'm not quite getting where the money's going to go into Housing 21. I did read in the report that it says if they don't receive the grant, unfortunately, they will be looking for any care schemes at this present moment with this. On this, is that correct? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So the whole scheme is a development to build these 80 units. And at the moment, Housing 21 have put in a business case to ourselves and to Homes England as part of the development agreement to build these 80 units. They needed to actually make sure that the funding was available and agreed before they put the planning permission in. I suppose it's like if you're planning an extension on your own house, you would make sure you've got the funding available before you apply for planning permission. So they needed to make sure that they had the business case and that they could demonstrate that they could build and actually develop the land and build the units in advance of the planning permission going in. They would need all this information for planning. So that has to come first, so they have to agree that the funding is secure before they can actually apply for planning permission. When they apply for planning permission, if the planning permission isn't agreed, then the council will no longer provide this money and it will come out of the capital programme.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
I think what Councillor Robinson raised is a valid point. With schemes of this size, even though there's nothing been agreed yet in terms of planning, I thought the capital programme had been reviewed when I was certainly working with the Chair as Cabinet Member, and that ward councillors would be, as a matter of course, notified of any potential sort of capital investments in their areas, in their ward. So perhaps if we can just refresh that then and make sure going forward. So as Councillor Robinson said, the first time she knows about it is in this, although I do believe it went through Councillor Nolan's committee. So again, perhaps it's something for our respective committee chairs to take on board about their communications with ward councillors then. But it did go through your committee, didn't it? Okay. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Councillor Cameron.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I think last time we were at this meeting, I was concerned about a long list of CapEx, and it's been much clearer now. It's all tidied up. It's unfortunate, the delays. I can see why so many things have to be delayed. At least we can see those now. But just sorting out which committee they sit in has helped, because my budget papers for my committee had 9 programmes, 1.4 million was the total, and we're now at 41 items with 12.4 million in my papers for tomorrow. So it's good to see a more comprehensive list coming to the committees. And I understand that things can happen in year that weren't budgeted. The sale loft is an example, and CCTV removal of analogue ones is an example. I understand these things can crop up. I don't understand, because it's not really my area, how a key route network can suddenly crop up. So there's no budget for £537,000 that is forecast to be spent this year, but there was no budget at the 1st of April. I only understand the basics around when the A41 had a huge investment, and the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority then has a process, and we see that. I didn't think over £500,000 crops up on a key route network that we didn't know about at the start of the year. So just some info, and I do have one other after that. Thanks.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So this is actually grant funding that we've received from Mersey Travel. Sometimes there are cases where funding we get from the Combined Authority, Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, does come at short notice. And this is potentially one of the cases where this has happened. So we didn't know that we were receiving this funding when the capital programme was put to and agreed at full council in March. It has come after that's been agreed. So as a result of that, because we didn't know it was included, we are including it in the capital report for this time. So it's not borrowing, it's not our scheme. Well, it's our scheme, but it's not our borrowing. It's actually funding that we've received from Mersey Travel from the Combined Authority. They've given it to us, so we are acting on that, and it will be included within the capital programme for the works to start.
And is that typical to be at such short notice, or?
It can be, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. And just to follow on from the previous conversation, there is an item here on page 78 that says restore empty homes. There's no budget, no forecast, so therefore there's no variance. There's also no budget for the next 3 financial years. Is it an error? Do we have any schemes to restore empty homes? Is it just on there from a previous report, or why is it listed? Should there be some amounts in there?
I'll come back to you on that if I can, Councillor Cameron. I'm not quite sure. It could have been that it's been might have been intended to be carried forward from the previous year, but it has actually been spent in the previous year. But I will come back to you on that. Yeah.
So I'm just going to bring Paul Satorian about the Combined Authority funding.
Very often, Councillor Cameron, with what happens with the Combined Authority, DFT will suddenly make monies available at very short notice, and then it'll be distributed proportionally across through the Combined Authority to the local authorities. So sometimes we have less than 6 weeks' notice, and then we're expected to find opportunities to spend that money. Not ideal, but that's sometimes how the Department for Transport works.
Yeah, that definitely does happen, and it's a strange thing to complain about. But the problem is when there's a deadline to have it spent in terms of resources, made available in order to get everything in place. But I accept it. It's not something we would normally complain about. I don't see anyone else that wishes. Oh, Councillor Cleary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just one question from me. It's on page 67, relating to the item on the community bank. I see that there's, over £2.5 million in variance there, and it says the majority of the scheme budget has been deferred into next year. So I'm looking for some reassurance there. Does that mean the progress on launching the community bank is delayed, or am I missing something there? Could you just clarify why exactly that's in there? The detail behind the figure. Yeah, thanks.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Cleary. So I think when the original investment was made for the community bank, it was pre-COVID, and the original plan and the reports that had come to Policy and Resources Committee for the community bank had anticipated that there would be an investment into the community bank earlier. There has been quite a lot of work undertaken on this from the CSBA, which is the Community Banking Association. So it's the external organisation who are supporting the community bank. It does tend to generally take about 2.5 years for community banks to gain a banking licence. And the investment is actually drawn down during that time, during those 2 to 2.5 years. So it's not the full investment has not been achieved yet for the community bank. So the CSBA are actually looking at trying to get in other investors for the bank as well. And there's lots of due diligence that has to be done in terms of making sure that the finances are correct and also the business case is correct as well. So there has been a delay in actually progressing the work on the community bank. And as a result of that, the investment has been, for Q1, been pushed forward into future years. And it will undoubtedly be pushed forward again into future years, because we're not near yet in actually starting much progress with the bank. And as I say, it does take 2 to 2.5 years to actually get a banking licence, which is when the full investment will need to be drawn down.
Okay, so if I could just get a bit of further clarification. So are we saying, I just want to be clear why there's a delay. I understand, compared to the updates we had previously, it was made fully clear to us that this process takes time. You don't launch a bank overnight. It does take, I understand that. And I understand there's some delays, but I'm still not totally clear why. Why is there a delay? What's the reason for the delay?
Mainly because of capacity. That's the reason for it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on it. As I say, a lot of due diligence that needs to be done on it. Officers within Wirral have not been available just due to COVID, closure of accounts. There's also Liverpool and Preston councils as well that are supporting the community bank. Again, they're in the same position. So they've not had the time or the capacity to actually put into this to support the Community Banking Association, because it's not a Wirral Council bank. We're the only commitment that we have so far in the capital report is an investment. The actual work needs to be undertaken by the people who are supporting the bank, so the board, chairman of the board, and the board has not been appointed to yet, so there has been a delay in appointing the board as well, so it's mainly because of capacity. Okay, thanks. I understand that. That's clear. I suppose my follow-up question then, is there any, it's no secret I'm very keen that we get on with this, and we're very keen to see it launched and start to reap the benefits, both socially and financially. So is there anything we can do to address that kind of delay? Do we have any leverage within our budget, our reserves, to actually try and move this forward, given that, capacity is an ongoing issue? Unfortunately, we don't at the moment, Councillor Cleary. As I say, because it's not our bank, we can support as much as possible, but we haven't. We are not. The councils aren't actually driving the bank forward. We're just supporting the associations that are actually driving the bank forward. And because they haven't got a board or an interim board at the moment, there's no movement in being able to drive that bank forward. So it is actually down to them. It's not a council initiative. Our only sort of support is the investment that we've actually got in. Okay, so just as a final comment, maybe we could communicate that to the board. I suppose some frustration, at least on my part, and probably others as well, that maybe they need to be pushing harder to move this process along, and just to maybe communicate that to them. I would certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, agreed. Councillor Robinson, you had your hand up.
It was just clarity, please, Chair. On page 59, 3.5.1, the liquid logic, and I know that's used obviously already, and it's sort of mentioned about some data collection on that, but it mentions the ICSs, which obviously haven't got, they're not actually legislation at the moment. Can I just have confirmation, please, that this doesn't mean people's data? Because you probably know that at least 1 million people have opted out of that, and it's been paused nationally. So whilst it mentions data on COVID and different things, and it's not actual people's data, their own data being shared with the NHS and social care, is it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. So it's only the data that we hold at the moment for people who are our clients or our customers. We do have a data sharing agreement with the NHS, and we do share data between ourselves, but it is a fully signed agreement, and there's a confidentiality clause in there. So we wouldn't do anything other than what we've already done or shared with people's data.
I didn't think so. I just wanted clarity with the opt-out. Thank you.
Councillor McManus, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Can I refer to the telecare and telehealth ecosystem on page 53, 3.2.2? And I noticed that there's a variance of £2 million due to the ability to attract additional funds. So I'd like an update on that, please, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McManus. Just finding that passage in here. Yeah, I can ask Director of Adult Care and Health to come back to you on that, Councillor McManus. I don't have all the information available there at this minute. But I think what it seems to be indicating is there was some grant funding agreed for the telecare and telehealth system that was, I think, did go through the Adult Care and Health Committee. This system is part of a whole Wirral, Cheshire and Merseyside system now. And with the introduction of the new integrated care system, us working more together on an integrated basis, there is a lot more partners involved within that funding, and potentially we are waiting for additional funding from other partners, or trying to actually bid for funding from other partners. But I will come back to you on with a more formal answer on that.
Yes, please. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the back of Councillor Cleary's points, actually, on the community bank, I'm just a bit concerned now. I think you, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, you said that the board has not yet been appointed, which is concerning since we put £185,000 into this. Just can you allude to why the delay in that is, what conversations you've had with organisations and your counterparts in other authorities, and just highlight what due diligence processes we are going through on this, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anderson. So we've not spent any money on this ourselves as yet. There has been an agreement, there was an agreement at the Policy and Resources Committee to draw some funding down for when the board does get appointed, and to support them to actually progress with starting up the bank. We've not spent any money as yet because of the delays in the board being appointed. It's quite a lengthy process, and actually appointing the board, so there needs to be a chairman of the board appointed, so that there's an interim board appointed first, which is actually starting up the community bank and trying to anticipate and ascertain what is needed for the community bank. So there are different sites around the whole of the Northwest that need to be identified as to where the main branches would be, where the supplementary and hub and spoke branches would be as well. There needs to be a determination of how many members there would need to be at the bank, and what we are doing at the moment, or what we have been doing in terms of the due diligence, is some sensitivity analysis to have a look at, what if there was more members, and what if there was more business members, and what if they had less in the bank, or they didn't lend. So there's quite a lot of analysis to be done on that, which we have been trying to go through at the moment, and trying to support the CSBA with that. As I said previously, because it's not our bank, we are only supporting in terms of an investment in the bank. So we don't have any requirement to support the bank from an officer perspective, but we have been trying to do that. Ourselves, Liverpool and Preston, we have found, still as a result of the impact of recovery from COVID and trying to balance budgets and all the other things that we're going on, our capacity is lacking, and at the moment our first priority is to the respective councils we work in. We need to make sure that our priority is, that our capacity is going towards our own respective areas. We do meet with the CSBA on a monthly or a bi-monthly basis at the moment to try and see how they're progressing with the bank. But it really is up to the CSBA, the Community Savings Banking Association, to drive this forward and to recruit the board themselves. What has happened in other areas of the country is they have had additional support and capacity in terms of recruiting members to the board, and they are actually driving the bank forward. I think what they found is that the people who've been recruited to the first banks were the people who were initially involved in starting up the CSBA and starting up the initiative for community banking, and their time is being spread a bit thin now because every region within the country is wanting them to be on part of their board, and the capacity of people out there being able to actually do this is quite short. So the main thing is just that the CSBA are finding it difficult to actually progress at the moment with the capacity of everybody to recruit an interim board, and then to go forward to ascertain what support is needed, who's needed on the actual board, and then they will go ahead and recruit the board as well. But as I say, we are meeting with them on a bi-monthly basis to see if we can provide any support to them, as necessary at the moment.
So just to confirm that whilst we agreed the sum of £185,000, that hasn't been... No. Okay, thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Sorry, Chair, last one, I promise. On page 68, obviously, the leisure, health and safety compliance, obviously, as we've said, we know that obviously some of the centres are being used for vaccine centres till April 2022. But I know I've had discussions, obviously, with leisure services. We're looking at, obviously, possibility of dual purposes. So will the money still be there for that? And I think, obviously, September was one of the dates where Woodchurch was one of the ones we're going to look at the possibly that being dual purpose use. So with that being taken out of the budget, I was just a bit concerned that that might not still continue to be the case. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Councillor Robinson, it's all the schemes in the capital programme have been reviewed, and all the ones that are included within the programme now are due to be completed this year, and if it's included in the capital programme, it will be included there for future years as well.
No, sorry, I don't explain very well. If that money's been taken out, if they were going to sort of look at this, obviously putting money into the centres to make them dual purpose while they're being vaccine centres, would that mean that there wouldn't be the money to continue to look at that for leisure services? Does that make sense? Sorry.
It does, yeah. No, sorry, that's my fault. Yeah, it's just being carried forward into next year. So what's happened is it's not being spent this year. It'll just be automatically reprofiled and be there for next year.
I'll have to come back again because they said September this year they were going to look at the possibility of being able to be dual use for this year, not next year. So will that now make an impact on the fact is, if that was the case, the money isn't there for them to still look at that potentially, if that is an option. Does that, am I explaining it a bit better? Sorry.
I think so. Is this, did you say page 68 in the report?
Yeah, page 68 on the report.
Yeah. So page 68 is where we've got items in the capital programme for this year that won't be spent this year, and that could be for a number of reasons. It might not be specifically because of the dual use. It could be because some of it has just been delayed and been reprofiled into future years. So it might not be specifically for that reason, but if there is a variance and it has been reprofiled, the money still will be there to be spent.
Okay, so it might not be about the dual use. Okay, thank you.
Got there in the end. Okay. Right then, so everyone's, nobody else wishes to ask a question. I'm going to move that we accept the recommendation, agree the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Nolan. You all agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 8 is the work programme. Update. Vicky, you're going to present this.
Yes, members, the purpose of this report is to ensure that you have the opportunity to contribute to the delivery of the committee's annual work programme. I would draw your attention to the items that are already on the work programme and invite any comments or if members would like to add anything further to the work programme.
Councillor Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. Just at last PNR, I mentioned about a report coming back from any asset sales, to top slice and create a community fund report from officers, which is minuted. I just don't see it on the work programme, so if we could add that and schedule that in, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Right, so I'm going to propose that we agree the work programme with what Councillor Anderson's just asked as an added item. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gray, thank you. Agree by assent, thank you. Okay, so we are now on section C, which is referrals from committees. So this is from the Economy, Regeneration and Development Committee. It's Wirral Grave Company, governance arrangements. So Vicky, you're going to talk us through this one, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report, members, is to recommend arrangements by which the Council is represented on the board of the Wirral Growth Company Limited Liability Partnership and the means by which the relationship between those representatives and the Council are governed. The Council currently has 4 places on the board of the Limited Liability Partnership. 2 of those places are currently filled by officers, those officers being the Assistant Director of Finance and the Director of Children, Families and Education. And the first recommendation in the report this evening asks members to approve that those officers occupying those particular posts continue to be two of the Council's representatives on the board. The other two places on the board have to date been filled by members. Councillor Jones is currently one of those members, and the second place is vacant at the present time. And so the second recommendation in the report asks members to give consideration as to whether those two places on the board should continue to be filled by members, or whether members would wish to consider officers taking up those places. Members of the board of the Limited Liability Partnership will obviously be participating directly in the activities of the LLP, so members are asked to, as I say, review whether or not they think that that is a role that they would want members to continue to exercise or not. Recommendation 3 in the report relates to the partnership shareholder board. Under the Constitution at present, there is a provision for a subcommittee of 3 or more members from this committee, the Policy and Resources Committee, to exercise delegated authority in relation to holding the Council's companies and limited liability partnership to account. And so the third recommendation asks members to consider the options in relation to which committee exercises those functions. In the report, the first of the options is that the position remains as it is now. So it is a subcommittee of this committee, the Policy and Resources Committee, which deals with all issues relating to the Council's companies and the Wirral Growth Company Limited Liability Partnership. The second recommendation is that a subcommittee could be created of the Economic Regeneration and Development Committee to exercise those functions in relation to the limited liability partnership. So the issues in relation to the Council's companies would remain with the shareholder board, which is the subcommittee of this committee, but there would be a separate subcommittee of ERD that would just deal with the limited liability partnership. And the third option is that a separate committee could be, a separate subcommittee could be created of this committee, which would just deal with the limited liability partnership. So there would effectively be two subcommittees of this committee, and they would in a sense mirror each other, but one would deal with the companies and one would deal with the limited liability partnership, because as members will be aware, although we refer to the Wirral Growth Company as a company, legally it is not actually a company, it is a limited liability partnership. And then the last recommendation in the report is a recommendation for members to consider the size of any subcommittee that was created. So at the moment, obviously, the shareholder board is made up of 3 members, but members may wish to increase the size of any subcommittee that you decide should deal with these matters. So I hope I've explained that clearly.
I don't know if it's possible to have explained that clearly, really.
I have tried to break it down into the various issues. Matthew Neild, who's our principal lawyer for planning and property and regeneration, is here. He's been advising the ERD committee in relation to this matter, so if there are any questions, some of them might be better answered by Matthew than by me. But I have suggested to the Chair that you might want to discuss the recommendations as sort of set out in the order of the report. That might help it to be clear as to what members are actually discussing at any particular point in time, rather than trying to just do the whole thing at once.
Okay, so firstly, I must admit, I was thinking to myself today, I think we need more committees. So I'm glad that we've got the prospect of having a few more here tonight. But joking aside, I think then that we could go through the recommendations separately rather than just having a bit of a free-for-all. So we'll look at the first one, which is around whether or not we retain elected members on the partnership board. and just replace Councillor Jones and Councillor Usher. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. The only concern we've discussed, because I'm on regeneration, is that if you are on the board of the company, you have to declare an interest at the meeting. So as the councillors on that, if you are on the board, you're going to miss half the meetings by declaring an interest all the time because you have a conflict of interest, so it causes a problem. So personally, I wouldn't want to be on it because of that reason.
I mean, the opportunity to miss half the meetings, I'd say, is a bonus, to be honest, but no, I think I agree with that, actually. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Councillor?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with Councillor Hodgson that it's probably not appropriate for members of ERD to be on the Wirral Growth Company. However, that doesn't preclude other members who are not on that committee and who are also not on the shareholder board from taking up those positions if we decide that we want member involvement. We have 2 officers. I don't fully understand the reasons, or they have been explained to me, for one of those positions. However, apparently that is historically what we've done, so presumably that will continue. We have 2 officers, so it seems fairly reasonable to me that we also have 2 officers and 2 members. So I'm quite happy to propose that, and I would suggest that nominations are made to the Director of Law and Governance.
I'd second that. Can I just confirm, if we were to agree that, Vicky, that the actual names of the members and from which party they're going to come, because there'll only be 2, will be worked out after this committee?
Chair, it is within the terms of reference for this committee to nominate members to those posts. So I think if it was possible for members to notify us of the names tonight, or certainly agree which groups they are going to come from, that would be helpful. But if I appreciate that there may be that you might agree which groups they come from, and we might have to be supplied with a name after the meeting, but if it could be done this evening, that would be helpful.
I mean, I'm happy to put our nomination forward, which is Councillor Jean Robinson. Don't know if there's any other names. Yeah.
So we're agreeing that on item 1, so the 2 members for, so you do want to do it on a 1-1 basis of parties? Is that what we're saying tonight? So 1 nomination from the Conservative group, 1 from the Labour group.
Does any other members have any thoughts on that? Councillor Cleary?
Yeah, I mean, just taking up the points that were raised earlier about people having to declare an interest. I mean, quite often we're getting items coming up from Regen to Policy and Resources, so presumably we're going to face exactly the same issue on occasion with members of Policy and Resources having to declare an interest. If legal could just kind of confirm that would still be the case, you know.
It is actually the case, Councillor Cleary, that in terms of if members of the ERD committee were on a subcommittee dealing with the issues in relation to the company, that wouldn't be a particular issue or conflict at that particular point. Obviously, there may, though, be circumstances where there could be a conflict of interest for somebody who is a member of the board of the LLP and somebody who is a member of a committee. But obviously, it will depend on what the issues. I think Matthew has provided advice to the ERD committee in relation to this particular issue. Perhaps he'd like to repeat that advice.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. The position is that I've certainly advised in relation to the ERD, if you had a scenario where a subcommittee of the ERD was created, which is one of the options, there would certainly be no conflict there in terms of a member taking part in the decision in terms of the subcommittee, in terms of the governance of the Wirral Growth Company, and then subsequently being involved at the main committee in terms of, for example, approving a site development plan. But there are potential conflicts in terms of a scenario where a member would be a member of the the Wirral Growth Company board and making decisions in that respect, which could potentially conflict in relation to a decision later on in terms of the a decision at a council involving a matter. It could be to do with, again, a site development plan approved by ERD committee or recommended to Policy and Resources Committee. It's on a case-by-case basis, and it is a factual matter that the board members have declared interest in the past and recused themselves, previously at Cabinet and at Environment Regeneration Development Committee, arising from their membership of the JV board.
Okay, can I make a suggestion then that if this is acceptable, that we so far agreed to replace the 2 elected members on the partnership board? I've submitted a nomination. I don't know whether any other groups want to do the same, or could you do that to Vicky after this? Yeah. The next part of this then really is what will be the board or committee that will scrutinise the partnership board. So there's an option to have a subcommittee. Sorry, could we just agree as well that the members going onto the partnership board will be from P&R? Yeah. Okay. So the next part, I mean, could it be anyone non-P&R? Oh, okay, I didn't think that was the case. So it can be anyone then, as long as it's not on the shareholder board. If that's what we decide will be the scrutinising body for the partnership board. I just need some thoughts on what would be the best board or committee to scrutinise the partnership boards. Anyone? Councillor Nolan?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, the logic seems to me that we leave the arrangements as they currently stand, which is that our interests in council, wholly or partly owned companies, sits with the shareholder board. And I would suggest that that's the right place for it to continue to be, rather than creating new subcommittees, or we'll end up with subcommittees of subcommittees of subcommittees. So I would suggest that it stays as it currently is with the shareholder board.
I don't see a problem with that, being on the shareholder board. The fourth recommendation is about numbers then. I do feel that we should increase it slightly, given the workload now, but you'd have to explain that, Vicky, around numbers and proportionality.
Okay. Yes, Chair, in relation to proportionality on the committees, if it was a subcommittee of 5 places, then the proportionality would be 2 Labour, 2 Conservative and 1 Liberal Democrat. If it was 6 places, it would be 3 Labour, 2 Conservative, 1 Liberal Democrat. And if it was 7 places, it would be 3 Labour, 2 Conservative, 1 Liberal Democrat and 1 Green. As I say, at the moment, there's currently 3. The Constitution says 3 or more members, and I think officers would recommend somewhere in the region of 5 to 7 members. It's a matter for the committee.
Councillor Cleary?
Yeah, well, from my point of view, my group would certainly want to be represented on that. And I think, to fully reflect the balance on the council, given that these are multi-million-pound decisions going forward, I think it is sensible for a committee to be fully representative of the council. So I would certainly support a size of 7 on the committee.
Do you have anyone that doesn't agree with that and wants to put a different number forward? Councillor Anderson?
A question, please, Chair. It's just occurred to me, as Councillor Cleary and Nolan quite rightly said about members of the Regeneration Committee shouldn't really sit on the shareholder, but on the scrutiny, do we still have that same credence? But also the question about members of audit and risk, does it apply to them as well?
So who would be the additional members on the shareholder board? Where are we to increase it? Where would they come from? Or where could they come from?
Chair, if the plan is that the shareholder board remains a subcommittee of this committee, then the members on the subcommittee would need to be members of this committee.
Councillor Stewart?
Thanks, Chair. If the members of that committee have to be from this from this committee, then that's going to put a huge burden on a large number of us. So I would not advocate going up to 7 in that instance. So it's just my contribution.
So we've got Councillor Cleary for 7, Councillor Stewart against 7, Councillor Clements, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Well, if you combine those 2 points of view, if you had a shareholder committee that wasn't a subcommittee of this committee, you could have more people involved and it wouldn't put the same pressure and load on P&R possibly.
Could we have members who aren't on Regen and not necessarily on P&R on the shareholder board, or does it have to be because it's a subcommittee of this?
Chair, if it's a subcommittee of ERD, then the members would have to come from ERD, and if it's a subcommittee of this committee, then the members have to come from this committee.
Councillor Anderson?
Sorry, it seems like we're going to be around in circles on this one. But could we make a constitutional change through council and not make that the case then? And it can come from any members of the council?
If members would like to make a recommendation to council, I suppose that there was a separate committee established to deal with these issues. It would in effect be a totally separate committee, wouldn't it? A new committee. It wouldn't be a subcommittee then, it would be a new committee.
Just one last question, because I won't want to create any delays or any issues. What's the urgency of this subcommittee? For example, could we, either do it next week, or could we defer it to discussion amongst group leaders and then come up with an agreement to bring back to the next P&R?
The matter could be deferred and brought back to the next Policy and Resources Committee. Obviously, as I say, some of the issues, the last 2 issues, need to be referred to full council anyway. So obviously that would need to go to council. I think, as it says in the report, obviously we're conscious that there was a decision made back in March of 2019 by the then leader of the council that a separate subcommittee should be set up to deal with the partnership issues. Obviously, because of COVID and other things that have been happening since, that hasn't progressed, and therefore we are conscious that the accounts of the growth company have not been presented to a member body of the council, and the performance of the growth company against the agreed business plan has not been considered by members. So obviously I think we would just be keen to give members the opportunity to consider those issues, but I wouldn't suggest it's something that has to literally be done immediately, but obviously I don't think we would want to cause delay unnecessarily.
Okay, just before we bring Councillor Nolan, I've got a question as well. Why is it that you think, because I think I've done full circle in terms of just leave the shareholder board as it is, membership-wise, why is it you think that there needs to be more people on there?
I think it was just the view was that obviously there will be a significant increase in workload at the moment. The shareholder board considers issues in relation to the 2 companies which the council owns, but obviously with the work coming through from the growth company as well, that will be a considerable increase in workload, and it was considered that members may feel that you know, with just 3 members that was a lot of work, but if the 3 members are content and feel that they can deal with that and everyone else is happy, then
Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to try to move things on, can I suggest that, as we already have a shareholder board of 3, that we leave that as it is for the moment and review it in, say, 6 months' time? If those 3 members feel that the workload is excessive, then we can look at increasing the numbers.
Councillor Cameron.
Sorry, I just need to get this clear. Before we were in a committee system, it was advised that we could do with additional levels of scrutiny in this particular instance. We have moved into the committee system, and now we're saying that has to be a subcommittee, which is now limiting our options in terms of members, especially if we're looking at 7. Are the distinct advantages over a subcommittee around scrutiny? I mean, you know, there's enormous capital at risk here. It really weighs heavy. I didn't appreciate some of the joking before about more committees. This is huge sums of money, of capital at risk, and we don't even know the governance arrangements and the options. I'd like to see a table of benefits around transparency, scrutiny of a committee versus the workload on a shareholder board, and any examples from anywhere else in the country where the governance arrangement has been working and hasn't been altered over the course of the life of the projects. Because if the accounts have not been looked at and we're so far down the road on the regeneration programme, not least of all with the amount of press coverage it's being given, the governance arrangements really are quite urgent.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Circles, and some time ago there was a discussion about 7 on the body that's going to look after this or keep an eye on it. The thing is, for those of us who remember the start 4 or 5 years ago, you sort of cast your mind back through what do members in general know. And apart from presentations about office blocks in Birkenhead, or one office block, and when it should or shouldn't start, the idea of development at Old Hall Road in Bromborough, or going ahead with projects in Morton, there are probably very few members have got a grip or a feel for the programme that the organisation is undertaking or will undertake. I suppose most members would wonder what progress has been made in recent years, but then make lots of allowances for the market, for COVID, for difficulties in the construction industry and general uncertainty in the economy. But the key thing is for enough members to have a knowledge, sufficient knowledge to have a clear idea about what the body is actually doing, which is why I'm quite happy to concur with Councillor Cleary that she should be expanded to 7 members, because that gives a chance to spread knowledge and understanding, but also gives some geographical spread of knowledge for what the project and what the company is doing. And so if Councillor Nolan is, I think, suggesting 3, having gone round, looked at the issue, I again agree with Councillor Clear that it should be a larger body.
Thanks, Councillor Gilchrist. I think to move progress, I was just going to suggest that we... sorry, Councillor Robinson.
Could I just ask, please, obviously, Vicky, so I presume deputies from this committee can also sit on this shareholder board. It doesn't just have people sat around this table now. It's deputies for P&O as well, is it?
There will be deputies. We did have a deputy at the shareholder board meeting this morning.
Sorry, but that wasn't the question. Sorry.
Will be from this committee, yes.
The deputies that sit on this committee can also could be nominated from the P&R committee. Thank you.
I'm going to take one more question and then I'm going to put a proposal on the floor, okay?
I was just going to suggest, there's clearly not consensus here. I'm just bearing in mind what Councillor Cameron and Councillor Gilchrist have just said, and Councillor Cleary. Why can't the accounts come to a P&R meeting as well? We are we could put these accounts to the next P&R meeting. We could keep the temporarily the shareholder board as is and take to the next group leaders this discussion to come back to a future P&R. So not kicking the can down the road, just
I think we should. I agree that we keep the shareholder board as it is currently, but ask officers to bring us something back
Well,
quite quickly in terms of how the future board could look.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to delay that decision. I think we need to look at
Not the
look at it
intention, but
immediately.
we can't agree
Group leaders, yeah.
at the moment. Is that acceptable to everyone?
I just feel it's not right at this stage. Sorry, I don't feel we're heading in the right direction. Shareholder board, the three, we probably have a great detailed discussion, and then what we get at P&R is either reworking of that discussion or about 2/3 of the memberships relying on those few members who are on the shareholder board. So it didn't seem sufficiently inclusive to me.
So, Councillor Gilchrist, are you proposing that? I mean, because we need to, I think we just need to either move to a vote.
That the project be overseen by a shareholder board of 7 members drawn proportionately.
And seconded by Councillor Cleary. Can I ask who's in favour of that?
Chair, can I just ask clarification? It's 7 members of P&R. No, we're not creating a subcommittee.
Or deputies?
Can I just have
Thank you, Chair. In terms of responsibility, the buck stops here. Therefore, it would be P&R. And if members are choosing deputies, I hope that deputies are chosen with care and just fill in on occasions.
Okay.
That's it, but we are it's a scrutiny committee. Effectively, isn't it? It's effectively scrutiny of the growth company. So I just don't see why it can't come from all members of the council, and we give it credence. But obviously, I'm trying to get discussion here about how we best go about it to accommodate a larger size. But if you're going to put that there, then
Okay, I think we should move to vote on it then. You've had a seconder in Councillor Cleary. Can I ask all in favour of that, of what Councillor Gilchrist has just moved? Against? Abstentions? Okay. Abstention. Thank you.
Well, given that that doesn't have support, it sounds like what might have support is a subcommittee of size 7 to be chosen from the entire membership of the council. So therefore, could we then move on that basis and take that proposal forward to a future meeting of full council?
Sorry, I thought that had to be a constitutional change by council, which is going to take quite some time. So at the present moment, whilst that might be the preferred option, obviously that is a constitutional change, which would have to probably go, is that correct? Vicky, is that what you were saying? It's not something we can do.
That will be a recommendation for this committee to full council will have to be considered.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Vicky, would that then have to go to the
Okay, I'm
council?
going to take a few more people and then I'm actually going to close this down.
Sorry.
Because we are literally going round in circles.
Does it have to go to the Constitutional Oversight Committee as well as full council under the Constitution?
I think in this particular instance there was going to be a recommendation directly from this committee to council, but obviously it won't be council on Monday, so it will be a little while off.
Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it's going round in circles. I just want to clarify something that Tom's kind of suggested earlier. I think, if I understood, if the members, the initial proposal which has failed, there's 7 members of this committee, which is nearly half the committee. Is there a reason why it can't just be placed as an item on the agenda for this whole committee to scrutinise, rather than have 7 members in yet another meeting?
An item can be put on the agenda for the full committee, Councillor Stewart, but obviously I think the view was that a subcommittee could perhaps have more time to go into more detail than obviously there's a lot of other items that go on the agenda for this main committee as well, but there's no reason why the whole committee can't consider the issues.
Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that the urgent matter, as Councillor Cameron's pointed out, is that the accounts have not been presented. I would suggest that those accounts are brought to the next P&R committee as a matter of urgency, and that further discussions are held in respect of the ongoing agreement about the shareholder board and how the governance of the Wirral Growth Company is managed going forward.
Happy to second that. Councillor Anderson.
If we're going to do that, well, can we go to the debate? So I'm happy to have an urgent item of accounts on here. I think that's sensible given the delay. It's just occurred to me that a committee of the council that scrutinises things is the partnerships committee, actually. So it might sit perfectly well with that committee.
Nice try, but...
What do you mean? We've already got, I'm sorry, Chair, we've already got a scrutiny committee. We could, so my question would be to our legal officer, would that be a feasible alternative to have the scrutiny of the shareholder board put into the partnerships committee?
It's the partnership board that's being scrutinised. Well, they are totally different functions. Well, Vicky?
I think, Councillor Anderson, that the Partnerships Committee not exclusively but largely scrutinises external partners, health, crime and disorder, fire and flood, those kinds of issues. Obviously, at the moment, these issues in relation to the council's companies and partnerships lies within the terms of reference of the Policy and Resources Committee within the Constitution. But obviously, Council can amend the Constitution if they see fit to do that.
I think the correct place is a subcommittee of this or the shareholder board. It is ultimately a matter that P&R should keep. It's just a decision around how many people on the shareholder board. I think that's where we've reached, have we? We've accepted it stays with P&R. Yeah, it stays with P&R. It comes to P&R. And 2 elected members to be decided soon. It's just a matter of how many people are going to be on the shareholder board. And that could be decided quite quickly, but if you could bring something to us quite quickly. Yeah. Have I completely misinterpreted what's been said? So, we've agreed to replace the 2 members that are no longer on the partnership board. We've agreed that the board that will scrutinise the partnership board will be part of P&R, will come from P&R membership. And I think we've agreed that it will be the shareholder board. We just haven't decided how many people are going to be on that. And I think Councillor Nolan's suggestion that we continue with the 3 members currently on it, but we ask officers to bring quite quickly a report to us that will allow us to look at increasing the makeup. And I think we're also in favour of the accounts coming separately here as a matter of urgency for all members to see. Did that make sense?
Chair, could I just also confirm that members are approving the first recommendation in relation to the 2 officers remaining on the board, the 2 current post holders for those posts of Assistant Director of Finance and Children, Families and Education Director remaining in place?
Sorry, Chair. Could I just ask, not that there's anything wrong with the Director of Children, so it's not personal, but I didn't understand where the logic was for putting the Director of Children's on to the growth company. Not that there's anything wrong with that, as I say. I think, does she sit on Evolutions or Essential board as well? So it was just asking the question where the logic is to who gets appointed as from officers, please.
So, Councillor Robinson, before my time, but my understanding was that my predecessor, because of the position, regeneration growth was all about the future children and where children's was at the time, that it would be appropriate to put the Director of Children's Service onto that committee, onto that shareholder board, sort of the future of the borough in the hands of the children, as it were. And obviously it wasn't the current DCS, it was the previous DCS, and that hasn't, that's why the current DCS is being nominated. Of course, that could be looked at. if necessary, but that's where that came from, I understand.
So could I suggest, not necessarily there's nothing wrong with Simone, obviously she's very good at what she does, but it's just that recommendation doesn't have to be a specific director. It can be obviously based on who may be the best.
I think it would be helpful as part of the report that you're now tasked with bringing to committee that we include all of that in it. And the scope and the remit of shareholder board.
Chair, may I just request a short 5-minute adjournment? I think we'll probably be quicker.
I don't think we need to, no.
Or can I propose a short adjournment then? A 10-minute adjournment.
Okay.
I'd like to move. Thank you.
Take a vote on that.
Can you second?
People happy to adjourn or to continue? Okay, 5 minutes. head teacher there. Okay, so I'd like to move that after listening to everyone's concerns and comments, it's quite clear. I think there's some really difference of opinions here about how the scrutiny of the Grove Company should proceed. So I would like to move that this committee in its entirety acts as that scrutiny body. The shareholder board should still stand and continue with its scrutiny of other rural evolutions and essentials, but I think that P&R in its entirety should be the scrutinising body for the Grove Company, and that the accounts do come to us at the next P&R committee. So do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Nolan, people happy? And the third. Do people happy to agree that?
I had a query to raise about the process.
Can it wait?
No, forgive me. If it comes to us, much of the paperwork is going to be commercially sensitive. So I need guidance on just how much of our discussion and scrutiny can actually take place in public.
I think we will still ask the officers to bring us something so that the scope and the remit of this committee in its new function is laid out for us all to see, and that can be covered in that. Yeah.
Can I just clarify, Chair, that the other recommendations to approve the 2 officers who currently hold posts on the board is approved by members, that members are agreeing to appoint 2 members to the other 2 places, and that names will be provided to the Director of Law and Governance following the meeting, 1 Labour member, 1 Conservative member, and that in relation to the third recommendation, members are asking that any matters that would have perhaps been referred to the shareholder board in relation to the limited liability partnership under the current constitution will come to the full committee rather than go to the subcommittee, and that a report is brought about the accounts to the next meeting. Is that the full?
And can I just confirm that the 2 officers, we'll agree to 2 officers being there, but because there's been some comments about the Director of Children's, maybe that needs to be decided in the future, but the agreement is it's 2 officers.
So when members like a report bringing in relation to the accounts, would you like a further report in relation to who the 2 officers are? Or
Councillor Stewart? We don't
Chair, I don't think that we necessarily need a report. I think it just needs to be tonight that what we are recommending is that 2 senior officers to be appointed, and it can be the Chief Exec that appoints the most appropriate officers.
So members are delegating to the Chief Executive to appoint 2 officers to the board. Yeah.
Okay. Are we all clear on that? Glad you are. Okay, well, sorry about this, payback. There is one AOB. And it will be brief, because I'll make sure it's brief. It's just, we were discussing in our pre-meet earlier, there's been a lot of interest in Afghan refugees, and I know it's going to be covered in group leaders tomorrow, but I've had a lot of there's been a lot of misinformation around whether or not the council is paying, footing the bill, etc. So I think I'd just like a quick update from the Chief Exec to explain the process around allocation and funding, and also what the coordination will be across the council in our response. Thank you.
So we circulated a note to all members last Thursday around the arrangements for funding for the Afghan refugees. We'll reissue that tomorrow, and included in that just a drop-off point really for donations that are being made for the Afghan refugees. We've already informally got a point or a building in the council estate where we are placing that. So we'll send a note out tomorrow.
And just regarding the funding, because this is P&R after all, I think it would be helpful to just to clear up the fact that it's not A lot of people think that we're going to be shelling out for a lot of things, but my understanding is that the Home Office provide funding.
Yeah, there's a variety of different schemes which I don't have to hand, but we put that in a note on Thursday, and I will reissue that note to all members.
And in terms of allocation of numbers, do you know how that's worked out, Paul?
No, there's a variety of different ways in which the Afghan refugees are being sourced to local authorities through different means. Home Office are going direct. We've taken, I think, 12 was the last that I was informed of, but it is coming through different routes and different sources.
I just think it's important, given that there may be public watching this, to maybe just very simply and quickly clear up some of the misconceptions out there. So 12, and we get funding from the Home Office and other sources.
That's correct, yes.
Does anyone else have any questions on that? It's just no. Okay. I mean, from my perspective, you know, I'm really proud of what we're doing as a council, and I've had so many nice residents contact me with offers of help. So that's certainly outnumbered the nasty stuff that's come my way. So thank you for clearing that up. Okay. Now I can bring the meeting to a close.